Hi, it's Jeff again. I'd like to take a few moments to share with you some thoughts on the concepts of war, peace, justice, and particularly the proper and justifiable uses of violence. Now, lately, a lot of people have come out to say that war is never justified under any circumstances. I think it's interesting when these sorts of things come to the fore during a time of conflict. Clearly, these people didn't think about it until we were in a conflict, and that may cast certain aspersions on their motives. In fact, I think generally a lot of people are cowards, and they say war is never justified because they're terrified that a war may come to them. They're doubly terrified that they might be called upon to actually do something in a war. And so they really become anti-war activists when a war happens. Now, that may not be fair. Could be people never think about it until it happens, but war is a pretty ever-present sort of a thing. History is full of wars. Our conversation and our media and our culture are ever referring to wars past, present, and future. So I think it's kind of thin, but I've been blessed recently to meet some people who say they believe that war is never justified under any circumstances for religious reasons. And these are Americans who ascribe to themselves the religion of Christianity. I have a special place in my heart for folks who use Scripture and who think it's authoritative in their lives. And so it's to that group that I'd like to speak today. And I'll save the other groups for a little bit later on because I have some thoughts for you as well. But for you Christians who say that it's never justified to have a war, I direct you to the God of war, Jehovah. And Jesus, who came in a Christophany, I believe, to Joshua before he went over Jordan, appeared to him, and Joshua said, "Who are you, and are you for or against us?" And this being that appeared to Joshua said, "Nay, but as the captain of the Lord of hosts am I now come," or as the captain of the hosts of the Lord am I now come. And he had a sword, and he instructed Joshua as to what he should do when he went across the river. Now, some think that Jesus was a pacifist. I think that's interesting, and you might gather that by the Sermon on the Mount, and people who say that they could never hurt anyone because of what the Sermon on the Mount says. I understand that. On my own behalf, I've never, as an adult, hurt anyone, and I hope I never have to. But bottom line is that I was never commanded to turn the other cheek of my 4-year-old daughter or my 3-year-old son. If you come to do bodily damage to my son or daughter, you want to rape and murder them, for example, I believe that Christ gives me full latitude to take your head off, and I will. I promise you. And I think that one of the reasons that I feel that that's very clear in Scripture is by what Jesus said to his disciples in the book of Luke, or as recorded in the book of Luke. He didn't say it in the book of Luke. He said it in Jerusalem, or in the vicinity of, way back about 2,000 years ago. Let me see if I can find this, because I think it's very instructional. In Luke, chapter 6, it wasn't chapter 6, was it? Because chapter 6 is the Beatitudes, rules the kingdom of life. Let's go back over here. Maybe it's 12:36. Nope, not. Wow, this is kind of embarrassing, isn't it? Don't worry, I'll find it. I like to use an electronic Bible searcher that does word search. Yeah, actually it's Luke 22. I don't know how I got that messed up. In Luke chapter 22, what Jesus said was that he was surely going to depart from the disciples and they would no longer be under his direct protection, essentially. And he said, "When I sent you without purse," starting in verse 35, "and scrip and shoes, lacked ye anything?" And they said, "Nothing." Then he said unto them, But now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say unto you that this is written must yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned among the transgressors. Jesus quoting from the Scripture. For the things concerning me have an end. And they said, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. And he said unto them, It is enough. Now I have heard people to say that they had to get the swords so that Jesus could be reckoned among the transgressors. Jesus was, of course, crucified between 2 thieves, transgressors. If Jesus commanded the disciples to buy swords so that he would be among transgressors, then in fact Jesus commanded them to sin, right? Because that would be a transgression. Now, swords were legal in Jerusalem and all of Israel at the time, And 2 out of 12, I think, interestingly, is 1 in 6, or 50 million out of 300 million Americans. Were we to be armed in America in a similar proportion as the disciples were? Moreover, when Christ was arrested in the garden later, Peter drew his sword and took a man's ear off with it. Christ healed the man and commanded Peter, saying, "Put away your sword. He that take up the sword shall die by the sword." And some people say, well, we should never take up the sword then. I think that Romans chapter 13 speaks of that, and it basically says that the government bears a sword, and he beareth the sword not in vain. In other words, government is a punisher of evildoers on God's behalf. And when people take up the sword to harm innocent people, those of us who respond with the sword have not been the first to take up the sword. So the idea being he that first takes up a sword is probably what the Lord is getting at. Aggression, since time immemorial, has been agreed upon as a justifiable cause for self-defense. And in fact, many pacifists who believe war is never justified would nonetheless call the police, who are armed, to come to their home in the event of a break-in or in the event of an assault. And they wouldn't hesitate to do so. Moreover, if you were to push them around a room, most pacifists would generally ultimately respond with some sort of physical prevention. They hold their hands up or knock you out of the way. I've tried this and it works exclusively, all the time. People, almost all of them. I'm sure there's the Gandhi out there who would allow you to totally abuse him, and my hat's off to that person, but most folks will in fact defend themselves, and that's a violation of what Christ said. But who among you, listening to me, could fail to defend a small child from a bloodthirsty murderer? I mean, really, would you say that's not justified? That a police officer should step, for example, between a child and a criminal, a murderer, a rapist? Of course not. You would, of course, agree. So, hopefully we agree that war in a general sense can be justified. Now, as to whether any given specific war is justified, that's a subject for another discussion. And we will discuss that then. And until then, this is Jeff White saying, take up the sword when it's appropriate. And carry your sword, as Christ said, for the defense of the innocent and those who have no defender, because that's justified and Christian and right.